But as time goes on and you start to think, these things of Kurt Schmoke pops back up in my head. I start thinking about other police officers I knew who were murdered, doing the same type work. And time's going on, so this wasn't an immediate thing for me, but my brain's working. And 2 years after Ed was murdered, in Baltimore, now I'm working as a police commander, there's a family of 7 that's murdered one night, almost exactly 2 years after Ed was murdered, the same month, October. Family of 7 was murdered in one night by one drug dealer. Not because people use drugs, but because of prohibition policies. The mother, being a good citizen, was working with the police to get this young man, this drug dealer, arrested and off of the corner from out in front of her home, because she had young boys that she wanted to keep out of that business. She had young boys she wanted to protect. She didn't want them exposed to the violence that followed this drug deal. And he didn't like it because she was interfering with his money. And he breaks into their home early one morning and sets home, kills the entire family. After that, I really started to turn. And after that, I went on the internet, and that's when I found the website for LEAP. They had just put it up. Because I was looking for other cops that were starting to feel the same way. And as time went on, I continued to learn more and do more research. And that's what we're going to talk about here today, where that research led, what I learned from joining LEAP, what I'm learning from all the many organizations that have been doing this work for a long time, how it affects human rights, how it affects our economy, how it affects public safety. Drug prohibition, our laws of prohibition are actually counterproductive to public safety. So for 33 years, I'm actually pushing, the work that I was doing was actually causing more harm in our streets and our communities. I mean, think about that. That's one of the reasons when you talk to police about this, who have been doing this work for so long, and then you tell them, what you've been doing for the past 10, 20 years, it's actually been worse for your community. That's a hard pill to swallow. So, as I move forward, here's what I'm learning. First, starting with the business that I was in, law enforcement, I was learning that prohibition was counterproductive to public safety in our communities. Why is that? Mexico is really experiencing it over the past 4 years. The harder we in police push to lock up, break up, tear down organizations that are out there dealing drugs, the more violent that community becomes. And here's why. Let's go back to the 1970s when I first started working undercover. In Baltimore, there were a handful of major drug organizations pushing heroin. They divided up the city. They had their agreements among themselves. This is how we will do it. This is how we will operate. Very little street violence, if any. Any violence that occurred, you had people disappearing, but they would disappear, in Leakin Park or in the basement, never out in the streets. And they were people who were involved in the drug trade, just like in organized crime. When you do something wrong, you pay the price. But here's what's interesting when you look at the 1970s and you look at today. There were no open-air drug markets. None. The reason there are open-air drug markets today is because of us. Because of police, because of DEA, because of local law enforcement. Richard Nixon gave federal dollars, started giving federal dollars, because they still do it today, to local law enforcement to join the federal drug war. What did that mean? We're going to get money in Baltimore and cities alike to start dismantling these major drug organizations, okay? Make it look good, we're tying violent crime, we're tying it to drugs, right? So we're dismantling these organizations. As we do that, we're creating a void. You see, as long as there's a demand, someone's going to fill it. We created a void. And in that void that we created came many hundreds of entrepreneurs who didn't know how to work the business as their predecessors. Now they've taken their business to the streets. And in the streets, they compete for market share, corners, just like in the HBO series The Watch. And with that comes the running gun battles and drive-by shootings. Now everybody's in danger. All right? Not only that, you've created many more distribution centers. So now you're actually flooding your community with more drugs because you have more stores in just about every corner. You have a store. And they sell to anyone. They don't card you. That's why when you hear prohibitionists today saying that ending prohibition will be dangerous for our kids, you're kidding me. We've already made it dangerous for our kids with what I just explained to you. We have to reel that in with a regulated and controlled market of some sort. So that's an example of how drug prohibition is counterproductive to public safety. In Mexico, over the past 4.5 years, the federal government here gave resources to Mexico to do the same thing, to dismantle the cartel. The predecessors, the heads of the cartel, had a way of doing business among themselves. Yes, there was some violence. Don't get me wrong, there was some violence. But when we disrupted that, same thing happened. And that's why over the past 4.5 years, the homicide rate at the hands of the cartel, now many cartel organizations, has gone to over 60,000 murders. 4.5 to 5 years. 10,000 missing. Orphans by the thousands. And it continues. Every year there are more homicides than the previous year. Venezuela, Costa Rica, Honduras, all of these countries are feeling the same effect. And that's why those leaders of those countries are now questioning U.S. policies. Because it was U.S. policies that we pushed to the world through the UN. Pushed to the world through the UN. And everyone's looking to us to reverse that and to end that. This is a good little segue into what I started talking about. David was talking about human rights and the United Nations, how the United Nations is supposed to be about global human rights, addressing human rights issues, and they're not. Anytime they refuse to put in a clause into the International Drug Control Treaty that says we will pay attention to human rights issues as we move forward with these policies. Refusing to do that says a lot. It says volumes.